ambiance and the infinitely adjacent, you recall. The example that I did not get to when we were talking would perhaps be El Primo. And that is back to what we were talking about several nights ago, that men would not long for, would not seek the way. If they did not believe it to be lost. I was going to take this final example and try again for you to see the level at which the intellect operates in the city. That this would not only raise, or it could if I carried it in that direction, interesting problems such that we could conclude that there is no simple answer to this. But if you will try and follow what I was about to do, I can turn it into there are no simple questions about this. Men would not seek, would not long for. That is, you understand, we're covering acting and thinking of acting. They would not seek, they would not even think about, they wouldn't plot, they wouldn't dream of finding the way. And you can cover that within your own definition, however it helps. The better way, the best way, the proper way, but the way. You know what I mean by now. You know what you mean. That men would not long for nor seek the way. Were they not already convinced that it was lost? Now that is a very good axiom. You could turn it into religious, you could turn it into metaphysical, cultish, psychological, humanistic. But now, listen, talking about infinite adjacentments. Is that axiom, is that idea, does it mean, intended to mean, that it is good for one to have it pointed out to one that they've lost the way so that they can begin to seek it? Is that the purpose of it? Probably if you're ordinary, that's about the best you can make of it. But hold on, Bunky. How about this? Could it not also signify a mistake in that idea? To be told such as that, inasmuch as it's not true, and all it does is set one upon a course of a fool's errand, both in exploration and in the planning of an exploration. No one followed that, eh? No one would seek the way if they didn't think they'd lost their way. No one would attempt to change in any manner unless they thought that in some way they had misstepped already in life. Whatever the basis, whether it seemed to come from your religious background, whether it seemed to come psychologically from your parents and your peers' pressure, or whether it just seems to be the voice of conscience. Take anything you want to. People would not attempt to change, that is, find the way, unless they thought they had already stepped off the way, that they had lost it. They would not be seeking paradise, heaven on earth, if they did not fully believe that they had been driven from paradise, that they had fallen somewhere, that they had tripped, that they had misstepped. That sounds, and you can take out the religious connotation, but that sounds as though that is an almost all-encompassing, non-debatable directive for everyone. And yet, you could also hear it this way, because life made men say this. It made men continue to repeat this in all forms, and for men to believe it. But you can also hear it this way. Men would not seek, even think about the way, unless they thought it was lost, that they had lost it. You could hear it this way. If I was responding to whoever said that, whatever part of life's nervous system that said that, if I said, all right, I know what you're saying. You know, what you should do is shut up about that, because men would not seek the way. Let's look at that as being the ultimate fool's errand. So men would not be going and doing that if you didn't tell them, if they didn't believe the way was lost. Do you follow? It is too filigreed, I think, for me to manhandle it much more. if you took it crudely, if you still think you missed it, and this is real crude, and I would hate for you to stop there, it is almost the exact opposite that everyone would believe is proper about life, but it's not the opposite. It's an infinite abutment to it. But it's not just the opposite, but what it would sound like was, if you want the crude place, if there's a proper way to live in life, then what you should do is not do that. That's not it. And people cannot hear that kind of message. And it's not me or someone else attempting to toy with words, because they can become vicious anyway. You should not do that, especially you children. But it would sound as though men would not seek the way unless they believed it lost. That it would sound as though if you were an ordinary, humane, intelligent citizen of the city, to hear that would think, I am delighted to have heard that, because I can feel the reality of it. I'm glad to know that someone understands this, that someone in the past has said this, because I've always felt a little, it's sixes and sevens, whatever the hell that means. If anybody knows, you can write me. Even dictionaries don't know. Only the British know, and they won't admit it. But a person would say, I've always felt as though something was not quite right. But now I'm glad to hear it. It is, because it is so widespread. It's inscribed, if not on every building, on everyone's forehead. That once you hear it, you look around, you realize, well, everyone's a little annoyed. Everyone's a little distressed. And now I hear what it is. This is a wide, all-encompassing cut through the thinking and the feelings of humanity that everyone responds to, that we have lost the way. And it's good to hear it. That's why we feel discomforted. That sounds as though that's it. But that's only taking one piece of the sentence. That's only taking one corner of the idea. That's only taking one aspect, one piece of the chain inside that kind of energy, atomic structure, because you can look at it another way. That if men were not made to believe that the way was lost, they wouldn't be out there wasting their time looking for the damn way. Now, it's not that that is correct and the other one's incorrect. Not at the ordinary level, because that's got no meaning whatsoever to ordinary people. And if there's any ordinary people who heard this and went, oh, that's it, I've been waiting to hear it, they're crazy. Really, they are. They're dangerous people if they're ordinary and heard that. Did anybody ever notice, or when we discuss such as that you try to think yourself, well, where does that place me? Well, we've discussed that before. I'm saying it's an area that if it was any smaller, it just damn near wouldn't exist. That's it. Now, in what category does that place me? Don't ask too much. Insofar as it being one of the other, that it could be of those two, and one of them being just a blind spot. And I could have used other examples. I could use any of the great world's axioms, but that one really, if you care on your own to think about it a few seconds, about wraps up all the great religious, philosophical, humane thoughts. That about wraps it up. Be religious, non-religious, intelligent, more emotionally driven, crude, sophisticated, and that about wraps up, if you could hear it that way, all of the world's great dreams, axioms, proverbs, truisms, cosmic ideals that men would not seek nor long for the way, that is to change, unless they had lost the way. So there, it covers everybody. That no one is perfect. Everyone is a little annoyed. Everyone has their own faults, and that's what makes everyone want to change. Except you can look at it another way. That what if what the nervous system takes from this energy, these words, takes as a given? No one ever analyzes it. What if it was otherwise? Now, wait a minute. You got that idea twisted around. I see it another way. That if whatever's making me do this, life, let's say, if life didn't make me think, if life didn't make me feel that, yeah, I have lost the way, yeah, something's not quite right, I wouldn't be wasting or spending these 65 years here going, well, what'll I do? Where'll I go? What'll I join? What do I do now? Even though the latter is not normally seen. If we just took it as being those two possibilities, I wanted to point out the unknown, the undiagnosed, the unregistered, the unpatented coeval four that's even more complicated than this. And that is, if we took what I just presented and said, all right, which one is it? Is it that that idea does represent that men have lost their way, and it's good to know this, because then, by God, you can get on with your life's work of trying to find it. Does it mean that? Or could it mean, hey, if you wasn't deluded with feeling like that you had lost your way, which you haven't, then you wouldn't be out here running around, like an accountant with his head cut off. I'm glad I didn't say a priest or an attorney with his head cut off, because then somebody would say, well, that would have been an improvement. And I personally, none of us here care for that kind of sarcastic humor, so we'll leave it at an accountant. But you can ask, well, which of the two is it? Four possibilities that go unnoted. It would be from a more revolutionist view. So, as to the question, all right, which is it? All right, it's both. It's neither. It's either one or the other, and then some. That is true with everything. This, of course, is a more down-home synonym for the infinitely adjacent. I know that just stretches some people's mind like the proverbial surgical glove. Pulled over one's, I said head that time, didn't I? Rather than some other part. Like, well, you think. But those four are always, when you are considering, well, is this right or wrong? Would this be a proper thing to do or an improper thing to do? If you in some way found it uncomfortable to try and use a kind of peeking hole that would be more attuned to an infinite abutment, then remember the great uncharted four. All right, is this right or wrong? Should I do this or not? Should I take up this kind of hobby? Should I actually change jobs or not? I mean, it's got to be. Would it be better for me to do what I'm doing now or leave? There's got to be one or the other. Always remember the great uncharted four. That the answer, if you've got to have it in good simplistic, put your hands on it down home terms, is it's both, it's neither, it's one or the other, and then some. I could say, and lots. The fourth one, of then some. That's number 4. There's lots. This leaves you with, might I suggest, the theorem of the evening. Or at least the first one. Within this silent, uncharted realm of the infinitely adjacent would be the final resolution at our level of all questions and problems regarding opposites, uncertainties, ambiguities, and impossibilities. That's the end of it. Conversely, if you think, well, wait a minute, some of this stuff sometimes sort of tickles my fancy, if not my brain, but by God, there's still questions that I'm faced with, there are problems in life, that it's not that simple. Well, of course, it's simpler than that, and it's more complex than that. It's according to which way that you've got to go with it. If you're just going to stand there and say, well, it's not as simple as this, then you're not ever going to move. You're waiting on a bus that will never arrive. Oh, there'll be many people who stand there and tell you, hey, I see one coming. There'll be one here later. There'll be many people who say, well, it just left. And if you stand there long enough at the horizontal level, that is, you get old enough and you don't change up here in this life, you'll stand there and there'll be people standing there right with you that apparently get on a bus that doesn't exist and leave you. And you'll stand there forever, though. If the basis of your conception, you're thinking of every problem that if you heard such as this, or if you thought such as this, and you went, wait a minute, that was tricky there for me, it almost got me, but that's far too simplistic. That can't be the answer. Or conversely, if you thought, well, wait a minute, little parts of that seem to have almost given me a little fender benders that went by, but God, that's so complex. It can't be that complex. So you've got three already. As long as it's not just the two, that I'm staying here waiting on the bus, and the bus is either going to come or not come. The bus is either going to come when I want it to, or it won't come. The bus is already left, or it hasn't left. That's all human problems. That's all of the questions and problems of the secondary world. If it is left on that basis, by now you should know there is no solution. Nobody's ever going to figure it out, because the basis of the game is its own self-limiting score. But you can consider every question, if you've got to try it that way, every question. It's not just silly, but every question, no matter how deep it seems to run into the affairs of man, or if it seems to be a question of morality, pardon me, you can always look, if it's a question about, well, should I do this or not? Is this true or false? Is this right or wrong? It's both. It's neither. It's one or the other, and then some. That is, at this level, that is the ultimate solution. That's the resolution of all questions and problems apparently regarding the matters of opposites, ambiguities, uncertainties, and the ever-popular impossibilities. That's it. Another aspect. We're seriously getting close to another paragraph for those of you keeping track, but I'm going to try to kind of segue into it. I'm not going to try, and we'll do it. As opposed to this kind of, as I was trying to describe, fresh, explanation-ridden world, that is, wherein you're not left either wondering, is the bus coming or is it not? Is it gone? Or is it going to rain or not rain? Should I be here or not? Should I go to another bus stop or not? As opposed to that, in a kind of intellectual area that I was suggesting would be just infested, explanationally infested. I'm sorry, I don't know a nicer way to put it. As opposed to that, the ordinary secondary world is wired up in such a way. Here we're slipping into a paragraph that people, the ordinary intellect, never has considered on this planet. But this is sort of a weekend wrap-up for our birthday celebration of that great, you know who. Man is wired up in such a way. The secondary world of man is wired up in such a way that he must stop and deal with verbal energy at the place that life dictates, and not where it might be possible, not where it might be plausible, not where someone here and there might even want to. Now, why don't we have a big old fat example? Refer you back to the last time we were talking. If a person stood up in the public neural arena somewhere and pointed out, let's say there's somebody speaking and some listeners, and somebody stood up and pointed out, as we were talking about, the irrefutable, historical, obvious folly of trying to cure, treat, much less eradicate what they call, what ordinary humanity calls, is forced to call, the criminal element. If it was simply pointed out, the absolute folly, undeniable, not open to any question. It's not a matter that there's some statistical evidence pro and some con, or that there's some historical evidence that it might. There's nothing. Nothing. Two simple words. If it was pointed out, the recipients of this information, of this observation, of this energy, That is, we're now assuming there's another person or persons representing that faction of life, the ordinary faction. You did just what I did. Through a little humor, a little sarcasm, just point out the fact that there is no evidence whatsoever. What I'm saying is irrefutable. There has never been any sort of apparent treatment, cure, eradication of the criminal element. Your words, people. None. Now I represent that other part of life's body. You go, well, and say, okay. You can't stop there. What they're re-representing, they're saying, well, okay. They might even say, we hear what you're saying. We hear the words. But the recipients cannot let that energy burst, that sentence, that idea. They cannot let it stop there. And it's not psychological. We could play some kind of psychological game if we were still dealing with kindergarten talk. But they are wired up in such a way that if they heard in some way, let's just say they did hear what I said, or whoever this person was. I'm saying I generically for this example. That they say, well, they cannot let it stop there. No, well, what they're saying is, well, okay, but they're waiting for the rest of the sentence. They're waiting for the rest of that energy, because that is not the place to stop. And if they're saying, okay, what they're saying is, oh, okay, we hear that part. That's like the beginning of the sentence. That's the setup to a joke. That's the premise to some piece of logic or some theory. And they take what you just said all the way up the beginning of a sentence, not a full sentence. That was not a statement. That was the beginning of a statement, and there's a comma after that, and them saying, okay. And what they're saying is, well, now you stated that, but, come on, what's your opinion? Is what they're saying. What's your position on this matter? It is not normally adequate or useful to life's purposes for some person, to stay with this example for a minute, to be able, for some person, and it doesn't happen, but I'm just pointing out why it doesn't happen, or one way to explain it. Life does not find it adequate. That's the easy part. The harder definition, does not find it useful for some person to stand up, to use this example, and to say to this crowd, to these other nervous systems, to this other neural part of life's own brain, thinking operation, for one person to say, you people, by now, should clearly see that the criminal element, as you call it, is simply a constant statistical part of life, of all civilized structures. Life's needs and the electrochemical dance going on in man's brain are such that this is not an adequate transfer of energies. And so it comes out on the basis, if this happened, which it does not, but if it happened that someone who understood, I'm twisting reality like a surgical glove, but if somebody did this, no one in the city, no one's ordinary intelligence would be satisfied. They wouldn't see any purpose in saying, look, folks, historically, statistically, any way you cut it, what you people call, not blaming it on them, because life calls it that, but what you people call the criminal element cannot be treated, it's never been treated. It is a statistical reality that's historically running everywhere. It's right here and now. And to think that in some way you're going to treat it, much less stamp it out, eradicate it, cure it, there is no evidence for it. You should be able to see by now it is simply a reality. The roaches go with the house. If we're talking about civilized structures, any civilization, you're going to have what you call the criminal element. And they go, and? Because life's saying, well, that doesn't do me any good. Do you hear me? That from one view, not an ordinary city view, because it's of no consequence to the city, or else they would be going along with this. It would be some part of their operational structure now. That kind of comment, let's assume that that is a fair, truly objective, if there was such a thing, an objective notation of some aspect of ordinary affairs. Do you see? I guess we'll have to call it the second theorem of the night. That a simple, direct, unencumbered, unconditional notation about anything is obviously of no particular use to life right now. That's my kind of theorem. That's the kind of theorem that's, if we weren't dealing in a fairly safe area, that kind of stuff is more dangerous than all kinds of atomic weapons. But what ordinary people believe, what ordinary intellect is made to believe, would be the dream, the ultimate of intellectual activity, would be true objective observations, which of course why science is held in such high esteem, that it pretends to such a throne. It aspires to actually make objective statements and notations of life. Notations that, Newton says, hey, push it and it'll push back. I don't care. I'm just telling you that's the way it is. And people are sorely amazed and impressed that, hey, that's true, a good scientific law. Or a Descartes or a Pythagoras says, 2 and 2 is 4, never 5, never 3. And people go, jeez. But at a more complex level, I'm just pointing out to you in our second theorem, it is obvious once you see it that if there were such things as objective, unencumbered, non-personal, non-local notations that could be made of life, which I did by saying that there is no evidence whatsoever, what they call the criminal element, what life calls its own criminal element, has not changed, is not going away, you cannot cure it, it's not supposed to be cured. How come nobody sees it? That is an example. Remember, this is just entertainment. But that's an example that I would suggest would be a true objective statement. But life, obviously, right now, has no particular use for such. Because even if it were made, trying to slip you back around the other end of the wagon train, if it were made, and people heard, well, yeah, I hear what you're saying, and they were sort of thinking along that, there's some validity. I bet if we went back and checked, I'm not sure that we're any more criminally inclined now than we were in Roman times. But they'd hear your statement, and they'd go, okay, yeah, because they would not hear a period when you said, how come you cannot clearly see that there is no chance of curing, much less eradicating in some way, the criminal element? And you said that as a period. Or you, all right, if you want a more complex sentence, and you said, isn't it time that you people can clearly see that it is a historical, it is a statistical part, inseparable part of all societies, all civilizations? And you put a period there. They would not hear it. Even if they heard that much, they would hear that as the preface. That is not a full energy exchange. You tried to hand somebody a packet of energy, and you gave them half of it, and you got the rest of it behind your back. And they're going, well, okay. Because they heard the period, because that's not all the statement. The rest of it is, well, and what do you have to say about that? Well, I got none to say. I tried to give you an objective, a non-personal, see? I don't have anything to tell you. I just gave you a good example of a non-personal, a non-subjective notation, because I don't care. I don't have anything else behind my back. That's it. It's meaningless to ordinary intelligence. Life has no use for the very thing that it describes. It has men describe as being objective notations of life. If it did, then that. And the examples are almost as numerous as I could make up, as you could make up. The things going on everywhere. It has to do not just with some widespread apparent, almost institutionalized aspect of life like crime. But down at the individual level of people, whatever their individual apparent historical complaints have been, the complaints, the ratio of them has not changed. And sometimes they are apparently supported theoretically, or promised support theoretically, by religions, by common sense, by hope for the future, whatever. And yet the very things that are constants in life, by their very definition, are constants in life. It is simply that life makes men dream otherwise, that, wait a minute, maybe someday I will be a more wise old monarch, like a good Shakespearean, that will go, now I see the folly of my ways, I'm so old I can no longer engage in such folly. Maybe that is going to sweep all of us along, and that everybody will be more wise at an earlier age. Maybe. But if you've tried to point out, if somebody tried to point out that there's something beyond your maybes, there's something beyond you wondering whether the bus will be on time, whether it won't show, whether it'll rain and ruin your new suit, or it won't rain, or whether everybody else has caught the bus and you're the only idiot still staying here. What if there's something else beyond all that? They go, I'd love to hear it. And so then if you point it out, well, look at the evidence. Can you see that there is no evidence to lead you to believe this? Not speculatively speaking, not me appealing to the gods and saying, wait, there's other information you don't know about. I'm talking about the information that's right before your bloody eyes. I'm talking about, you've already written history, you people. Of course, life did it. I'm talking about the history they accept. How can you stand there and continue to put on a suit, take a shower, get up in the morning, go to work, stand there in the halls of Congress, stand somewhere, and talk about, well, here is my plan. Here is how we're going to, without any doubt, cut down on this growing, intolerable drug use amongst our people. And if you just said, look, you pass for intelligent, you pass for being one of the leaders of our particular little city. In fact, I hear you have a college education. I hear you majored in history and political science. Can you think back? Is there any evidence whatsoever that things are worse than they ever were? Is there any evidence that any attempt that's ever been made to cut down on criminal activity or to cut down on people spraying their brains with stuff, all the way from prayers to dope and alcohol? Is there any evidence that in some way you can control that? Well, let's start. Is there any way that in some way they think everyone that comes up with a plan that education's it? If we educate our youth to the dangers of, and fill it in, crime, drugs, in some places religion. If we educate them, then they will be the wise old king before the age of 75. Sir, think back to your schooling and all your reading. Is there any evidence whatsoever, one piece, that might have some validity? And the answer is, to them, okay, I hear you. Go ahead. That's all I had to say. Oh, no, come on. You know, what are you selling? What's your idea? What's your opinion? What's your position on this? That was my position. No. Do you see? It even reflected, come to think about it. Some of me talking about Shakespeare because some of you are not quite yet 300 and something years old, but I bet a lot of you are around in the 60s. That is, not the 1660s, but the 1960s, and the Beatles. I can't recall the name of the tune, the title, but it was this very deep, philosophical, for 19-year-old kids, attack on a man that had no opinion. What was the name of the song? Nowhere Man. But the song was an attack on a man with no opinions. Not that they came up, that wasn't anything original with them, but it was a condemnation, and it seemed to be pretty intellectual. If you were, I guess, about the same age and spraying your brains with the same stuff. What kind of person is that? What kind of shallow, beige-colored, nondescript person would just have no opinions? And of course, in the city, life is making people have valid comments, because in the city, you're supposed to be in an armed count. If your brain is operating at the ordinary level, you are in some armed count. You may be in the forefront of the camp, or you may be a hanger-on at the camp. They may have to drag you into battle. But you are a member of some camp. That's the only way the brain operates. And so if you did try to do the thing that the intellect is made to believe, is what we're aspiring for. That is the truth. And the truth would have to be something that is real, is substantial, constructive, descriptive, outside of mine or yours, your wishes, opinions, beliefs. That would be the truth. That would be an objective notation of life. But if you made an objective notation, don't let my one example choke you, but if you made some objective notation such as, hey, there's no evidence that you're ever going to wipe out a statistical side of life that you have, label the criminal element. It doesn't vary, it just keeps going on. You know, how come nobody sees that? That is not being in a camp. It is meaningless. They can hear the words, but then life makes whoever your listeners are say, yeah, give me the rest. You say, that's it. That's an objective notation. They say, well, you can call anything you want to, but, what are you hiding? What's your position in this? What are you up to? Why did you point this out? You didn't point it out just to point it out. I'm not an idiot. You pointed it out for a reason. So what is your opinion? Do you hear me? And they're just doing that. Of course, most likely they wouldn't even bother to fool with you much. That if you got up, if you were dumb enough to try and make such a statement, most people wouldn't hear it. I mean, they might hear the words and they'd wait a minute to hear whether you were going to turn out to be, pro-rehabilitation, or to put it simply, in the Western world, they would want to hear whether you're going to end up being a political conservative or a liberal, that you're there selling some kind of program. And so if they heard what you said about, there's no evidence that you can do anything about the criminal element, it is a statistical reality and it's going to be with us just like bad smells. It's like foot fungus, it's with us. They hear that as a comma and they go, well, and they'd stand there if they heard you say that. And they'd wait a second, and if you packed up your briefcase and walked off, they'd think, if they thought anything, it'd just be that you're an idiot or you're a drunk or, how the hell did you get up on a platform? Because what you said, the first part of the sentence made sense, but what was the point? Because in life, as it is now, to make an objective notation has no point. That's not a full statement. That is not a full energy exchange, because the rest of it is them going, well, and they wait a minute, because they heard what you said, that there is no evidence showing that the criminal element the percentage of it, the existence of it in human society, there is no evidence at all to show that can be affected. All right, they can hear that. It makes sense. And so they wait a second, and you pack up your briefcase and leave. They look off and leave, and they'd forget all about it because it was not a true transfer. It was like you asked them to dance, and they went, well, and then you walked off. And there they were left ready to step in and dance. What nerve? You just walked off. This kind of thing people just forget about. I'm not going to be human. It's like it never happened. But if it did go any further, is what I'm doing with all these hand gestures, they go, well, because life would be waiting for the full exchange. That is no exchange. It is of no consequence to life. That's why it doesn't happen. Or if it did happen, it wouldn't go anywhere. Nobody to hear it. I guess as an aside, for you people that like smart-ass humor, me playing this part of life, consider this really a side. You can parenthetically take it out of the tape or take it out of your brain, but I know everybody likes a cheap laugh now and then. So the life, that is your listeners, the recipients of this energy, that you point out some objective notation of life, and they go, and what's your opinion? What's the point? I guess you could say, well, okay, the point is you people are bloody idiots. You're dummies. I'm glad that you people don't like sarcastic humor that much anymore. But that is the closest thing, since I went ahead this far, that would be the closest thing to a real pertinent response, if you're going to make one, to somebody who did not understand what was going on with the energy exchange and insisted, all right, what's your point? Even though it sounded, I thought, would just make some of you get a cheap laugh, but then I thought some of you might go, and realize it was not just a cheap laugh. But evidently nobody did, is why I'm still stuck here. Is if you were going to say anything verbally to them that would even begin to close up this little package of energy, would be if they said, well, we heard that, but now, what's your opinion? What's your point in doing this? And you say, well, my point was just to say you people are goddamn idiots. Oh. Do you follow? So that's why I prefaced it, saying that it could sound sarcastic, and I was going to let it go if enough of you went laugh and then realize, hey, that's not funny. That's something else. But since you didn't, that's why I'm having to drag it out. Because it's not just a sarcastic joke. And of course, you wouldn't do it in life. It wouldn't even go that far. But that would be closer to verbally putting a finish on that sentence that would have some meaning if somebody, an ordinary person, had gone on that far, and you made this comment such as about the criminal element, and they went, yeah, and you tried to tell them, you said, well, that's it. I was just trying to point out objectively that that's it. I didn't have an opinion. They went, well, you got to have an opinion. You wouldn't have brought this up. That's not the way life is. You've got some agenda in mind. You've got some purpose in saying that. And you said, okay. My purpose was just to point out that everybody in the world is goddamn blind. They're dummies. They're idiots. Then that person might have gone, oh. Of course, it wouldn't happen, but that was the basis of me taking that hoped for, semi-vivacious aside. It was not as vigorous and alive as I had hoped for, but then again, I just found out today that Daffy Duck is actually a drawn cartoon, so we can't go by me. I was going to wrap up. We were going to wrap up a kind of tie-in to a little something else. Before I leave the theorem that I just did, don't lose your place. If you saw the first part, you should get the rest of the theorem, but I didn't really finish. I was going to give an end to that theorem. But that being that if there were if it was possible to give a simple, objective, direct, unencumbered, unconditional, unbiased, unpersonal, non-local notation about something in life, then you should be able to see that life obviously, blatantly, has no particular use for that right now. But I was going to put a semicolon there at least. I was going to put some kind of punctuation, whatever belongs there, sick. It's not only of no particular use, but the electrochemical needs of life are such that not only would that be of no use, that its needs, it comes out verbally, but its actual electrical needs are such that all reports that men are making to each other, how men describe themselves, their relationships, and life, rather than it being anything approaching an objective, non-local notation, it has indeed got to be combative, conflictive, divisive, debatable, and it's got to ultimately result in futile efforts, fool's errands, such as attempting to rehabilitate the criminal element, attempting to find the lost way. That's what life requires right now at this level of everybody. Operating at the ordinary level is not some objective notation, not some direct looking at what's going on and going, well, that's what's going on. At the ordinary level, you can't do that. You'd look and say, well, that's what's going on. But even to yourself, your brain won't stop there. It'll hear a comma and it'll go ahead and say, well, that's what's going on, and by God, I don't like it. It may not be a big deal, and you go ahead and go to the microwave and make a pizza. But if your brain, if this whole scenario is going on inside of you, it's not just you talking to another group of people about the futility of trying to cure and eradicate the criminal element, or whatever it is, however large, small, widespread, local it seems to be, even if it was in your own brain, and you went, well, you're listening to them talk about all the money they're spending on trying to build new prisons, trying to get the young, and trying to take people that's already had a few problems and they're in juvenile detention, and to try and give them a nice home life, maybe buy them all a new Corvette, and that'd probably help. And perhaps you're looking on TV and you think, that's not going to help. Even you don't take that. Let's say that's an objective observation of, if we take these young people that's already, well, let's say not just been in juvenile detention, that you have had to been in juvenile custody at least 3 times. And then we're going to allot the money to give, if you've been in trouble 3 times, you're under 21, we will give you a new Corvette and a scholarship to a decent college so that you can get a good education and drag you out of this cycle of criminal activity. And let's say you hear that, and you say just to you, your brain says to you, well, that won't work. And let's say that that's an objective statement, an objective observation of that. But even you can't stop there. You don't say, well, that won't work. You say, that won't work. And I don't like them trying, and me having to pay for it. Or I don't like it in general. That's the kind of goddamn woolly-headed liberal thinking that's running this country. You can't just say, well, blah, 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 blah. You cannot make something that would have seemed to be an objective statement because the energy in you. It's like you started to wash yourself and you washed, half your face. So you realize you stink and you washed one armpit and you let that one go. You realize, well, something's wrong. You cannot even yourself make something that would approach an objective notation or observation, because after that, then you have to say, well, such and such seems to be true. I'm glad. It is no longer, if it was originally, something resembling an objective notation or observation, and you say, well, I see such and such to be the case, and I like it. It's now something else. We can now, from one view, say it's now subjective and meaningless, but whoa, 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 neighbor. Now it is a complete energy transfer, and it's not meaningless. It's exactly what life needs. Is why you can't stop normally somewhere and just say, well, such and such seems to be the case. Because life says, and you have to go, and by God, I don't like it. And life says, that a boy. It's like life breathed in, and if everybody decided finally, just suddenly, too many people to make an objective observation of some nature, and life goes, and it's like, come on. I cannot breathe. I had half a thought, I got to have the rest of the thought. And the rest of the thought is always on some nature, on some basis of, and my position is, because that's what everybody waits for, about, well. You got some agenda in mind. There's an end to this sentence. That thought is not a thought. So anyway, I want you to be able to consider a full spectrum, both ends of that theorem, that life, once you see it, obviously has no particular use right now of anything that would resemble or that would be an objective statement in the full sense of the word. It simply has no use for it, regardless of what it makes men think. Contrary, or contraire. Life's electrical, chemical needs, the same as your brain, the same as your own nervous system, but its needs are such that it has got to be fed via man's thinking through that which is combative, conflictive, divisive, abrasive, unsatisfying, and results in futile, fool's errands, both here, thinking of action, and in action. That's what it needs. And so you cannot have the beginning of a sentence. You can't have a full sentence being something that would be a non-conflictive, non-abrasive, non-divisive sentence or idea. That is an objective notation of something. You can't have that. If you do, it's not feeding life. It is not moving energy about. No one benefits at the ordinary level. It's reported there are some people that finds out how to kind of nosh off that. It's brooded about. What we were going to try and wrap up, I like more and more dragging you people will just be the total en masse royal prerogative. We're all we. Not all wet and not Henri. All we. I was referring you back when I was going to try and get you to tie up a little piece of something of the Kairoot that pointed out that if you're in conflict with your own aim, what chance have you got? Remember, that was a few times back when we were talking. How are you ever going to be compatible with your own aim? If you're in some way in conflict with yourself. What chance have you got if you're in conflict with the aim? Now, the aim could start out, we could describe it at city level, is just anything. But since we're running out of tape, we are obviously referring to something, wherever it is, in some infinitely adjacent area than ordinary secondary pursuits. But as long as that is, you're trying to find some way that doesn't even exist, not the one that people think they're looking for. But as long as you accept the voices in your head as correctly identifying your enemy as being you, that your adversary, the thing that made you lose the way, the thing that keeps you on the improper way, you got one adversary, by God, and it's not Lucifer, and it's not your dead grandmother, it's you, then there is no possibility, there's no way to objectively ever think about having an aim, because you cannot be compatible with whatever the damn aim is, because you are forever in conflict with you. This does not, of course, as I'm sure you people should know, has nothing to do with any secondary city level 3D theories like I'm okay and you're okay. And saying that I'm okay, warts, faults, warts, faults, and failures. That's what I meant to say. That I'm all right in spite of me not being perfect right now. I'm still all right. It's not that. As you should know, because that keeps you where you are. You can still stand there waiting on a bus, and somebody could even go by, or a voice whispers in your ear. The wind says, "All buses may have left a long time before you got here, Dumbo." And the "I'm all right" dynamic can be, all right, that could be true. I could be making a mistake to stand here, but I've been inclined to make mistakes like that, and thanks to Dr. So-and-so and my 10 years of therapy and a few drugs, I'm not all that upset. That's what I mean about the I'm all right, warts, faults, failures, and all. What this kind of stuff I would suggest would have to ultimately be about is to go into some new virgin neural territory wherein there is really no old self to compete with, to be compatible with. That there is no question about this thing's all right or it's not all right. You're back to the question about, all right, which is it? And if you got to be simple again, remember, it's both, neither, one or the other, and then some. And then, once you see that, leave it the hell alone and go somewhere else. Unless you want to stand at the bus stop and see what happens. Which, of course, I can tell you what's going to happen. Well, that's the least of your worries. No, that's the most of your worries. All right? All right, we've got to settle. Which is it? All right, it's both, neither, one or the other, and then some. Do you understand the whole thing? A little joke came out in the car route, and I think we've joked about it before, that if you wanted to make a whole new something approaching an objective psychology, philosophy, even religion, would be to call it, it'd be a long name, but let's call it a psychology. For those of you who have weaker minds or backs, you can call it a religion or a church. That the full name should read and there's got to be a quote within a quote, notice, but it would be the not how to cope with psychology, but the psychology of you don't have to hell to cope. Which I guess ordinary people, if they had followed that, might take as a sarcastic slap in the face to humanity or the intelligentsia or the ordinary ideas of man's psyche. But all religions, all psychologists, everyone standing at the bus stop believes that they're trying, and of course searching for the way to get back on the right way, is so as to better, there's got to be a purpose to get back on the way, it's so as to better to cope with. And then you fill it in, to cope with yourself, to cope with your fears, to cope with your family, to cope with your history. But you'll be at the bus stop forever. My suggestion would be a psychology, a religion, a difference in the nervous system that requires that you go to a new place, to where it's not how to cope with something, is to find out, and this is not true at the level that the ordinary intelligence would laugh and react to, it's not true at that level, but it's to find out that you do not have to cope, period. Not that you learn how to cope with this, but just by saying that. Even some way I could, or you could, get ordinary people to band together and say, that's a great idea, we'll start a whole political or religious or philosophical idea, and that's what we'll represent is, by God, you don't have to cope with stuff. All this stuff about what people think of me and whether my mother actually liked me or not, and now she's dead and I don't know what to do about it. What if we don't have to worry about learning how to cope with all this stuff? What if he's true? What if that's correct? That, by God, you don't have to cope. All that is a kind of nihilistic religion, as they feel like, well, our sub-motto is going to be, stuff everything. But, you don't have to start a new church for that. You just turn into a German or an Italian or something. Don't write me. Most people here are Germans anyway. You might as well face up to it. Most of you are Anglo-Saxons, so I shouldn't even apologize to attacking Germans. Just most people like to forget it and say, well, my name's McIntosh and I'm obviously Irish. I have a Latin name. I'm Castilian, and some of us know where the Castilian suddenly popped up from. Just out there on the Iberian Peninsula saying, oh, we're suddenly here. And history mercifully seems to have overlooked the fact of, well, wait a minute, a couple of hundred years ago, last time we noticed a bunch of Visigoths over there. Oh, no. Never heard of it. At any rate. At any rate, you would have to move to an area. It's not that you're having to cope with something, and it's not being smart like you say, well, stuff everything, because just trying to adopt a philosophy of saying, well, we don't have to cope with nothing. That's not it. The thing would be, could you move to a new neural area where you're not having to cope with the you? That's it. That's the trick. But you can't theorize, and you cannot just follow some kind of cult or a philosophy and do that. You would internally have to move to a new neural area wherein you are not having to cope with you, because it's the you that's having to cope with the rest. So to try and in some way deal with coping with that, or even try to short circuit it, you're back on a fool's errand. You understand? That is, you're trying to wash your car while you're in the house. You're trying to engage in foreplay with boxing gloves on. You're always one step removed, and you'll never get to the coping with. All right, my going away weekend, our present, our great birthday present. I wanted to ask you, or leave you to consider this. What if we were talking about that words were their own separate, living entities? That they were actually things, and you just can't see them, but they were actually beings. Would this not offer up a cornucopia of new views and possibilities regarding all the claims of people talking to the dead, conversing with the gods, communicating with UFO aliens? All forms of ordinary claims of people, they just insist that I talk to people like the dead. What they're saying is, I talk to people. That is, I engaged in words, and there was nobody there. Which is the same thing with gods. And that leaves many people in the city that take some of this seriously. Or if they know the people and say, well, now, Hubert's always been reasonable. How come he suddenly believes that God's talking to him? Or how comes Bertha now believes that her dead grandmother's talking to her, and she's been sane? Why? Consider, if words are actually alive, and people are saying, which all that is, what they're actually saying is, hey, I had intercourse with some words, I had a conversation with some words, and there was actually no people there, producing the words like everybody knows this, it must be. What if it's not must be? What if words are actually alive? Well, whether you like it or not, that was our collective present. Bye. Oh, are you? We back running for the epilogue right quick? About 10 seconds. All right. Bye, God. Huh? Ready? Is everybody ready? Hello, Canada, Florida, Montana, New Mexico, Albania, New York, Oregon. Again, from the last epilogue episode, I couldn't resist. How about one more name? If we did something publicly, crudely. Now, I left you with that little, I guess you took it as a joke, except for you people watching this on the epilogue, and you know that all jokes are no joke at all. Well, I was going to give another, instead of just a suggestion. I know on the tape I just played around with talking about the church if you don't have to cope, and I was saying it'd be a psychology and philosophy. That was people that might get this on tape some of the time that I got no control over, and so I got some control over you. But the long version, a better name. I know it's a mouthful, but this would be, I suggest, the church of, if you want to call it that, that's the easiest way to put it. The church of, fuck the past, including right now. We don't live in the past. It's supposed to be a T. Only the dead do.